Hello and welcome to the Digital EDU Dialogues podcast. I'm Angela Britcher, and joining me today is Sheila Fry, the COO of the Babb Group. Welcome, Sheila.
Hello, great to be back.
We are so happy to have you back on our show. And today we are going to talk about the just out Chloe 9 report and how schools can start incorporating some of these insights as they work on developing online programs. And let's just dive right in and start talking about some of the highlights of the report. And so we know that online learning is what is really in high demand. And we have seen this, that successful institutions are finding ways to expand those programs. If you could talk about what you are seeing as you work with school leaders from around the country and how the Babb Group is working with schools to implement these plans.
Yeah. Well, we see this all in there. There was so much great information in that report. But one of the big ones is obviously that sustained demand for online learning, which is very exciting for institutions from a revenue standpoint. It's great for enrollments. It's great for expansion. But even as we see across, as we're talking to people in the internet, LinkedIn, this report, you see a vast difference between the haves and the have-nots. The ones who are the haves, who are very successful, are expanding, are following all those statistics in there. They're growing their online classes. They're growing their online programs. They're transferring on ground to online courses and programs. So it's important to see that momentum keep moving along and keep shifting. A big takeaway I think that's important in there is the retention aspect of it. Even though you're doing those types of things, you need to retain those students in order to rebuild that growth, take that enrollment to a higher level. Because theoretically, the students are only one click away from their competition. So if they don't like your program or your schools, or you're not doing this, their boundaries are unlimited. They can go anywhere. They don't have to stay within the confines of your school. So they're one click away from that competition. But the biggest thing I think that was important in that report is that students are looking for options, not just traditional students, online and adult students. They want hybrid, they want online, they want high flex, they want competency, they want micro credentials, they want everything. They want the whole potluck that they can possibly achieve. So how are schools going to respond to that? And we see some shifts there. We see them looking at what their target base wants. Some of the biggest growth areas are in the adult learning and the graduate studies. These are ones that are coming back to finish a degree maybe that they started a long time ago, looking for little micro credentials, workforce development, or graduate students who are looking for professional development certificates. So the options are endless, and it's how do these schools embrace it and how do they look at that now as they make their strategic plans to move forward.
That is a great segue into our next topic about how we can strategically integrate online learning. And we've seen schools that are doing this very well, and we see schools that are struggling with this. What are some ways that schools can work to operationalize this?
Well, what was most surprising to me for some of the data that was in that report is and especially in this area, was that 39% of schools are still developing plans for online. Which as long as we've all been doing this, I know you and I, we've been in the online field for many, many years, 20 plus years, big change from then to now. But I think the fact that they are developing the plans is encouraging. Some probably thought it was a flash in the pan. It was going to go away. Everyone's coming back to their traditional environment. We know now that that's not the case. Students want those options like we just talked about. So how are they going to do that? So how are they going to align those strategies with their mission? Are they going to ensure that those programs are meeting just not the school objectives, but the students' objectives for what they want to achieve and what they want to learn? And how are we going to drive that engagement? So they're starting to look at this as far as perhaps the biggest trend was we've got all these on-ground classes. We need to move them online, which is great. Or we've got these programs. We're going to move them online. But how are you going to do that? What's going to make them meaningful? How do you build quality into those courses? How do you create a consistent learning environment, and how to make the learning meaning and purposeful? So, and while it may seem easy, they say, well, we'll just take this content, shift it over. That's great in theory. However, it creates a rash of problems. First, on the ground learning and online learning, the approach, how students learn, how students access information is obviously, how even instructors interact is significantly different. So we need to make sure that when you do this, first, that there's a consistent navigation, that you're having the quality, that you cover the aspects that are important. But it's not as simple as just moving those over. In order to make sure that your school is not violating Section 8, Section 508 considerations, WCAG 2.0 with universal designs for learning, making sure you have consistent navigation. By just thinking you can just take these files, move them over, and let the faculty just do whatever they want in regards to layout, flow, structure, whatever, you could be setting yourself up for some problems down the road. Accessibility, inclusivity, all those types of things. All those require federal requirements that are looking at those, and some states specifically themselves are really looking at how you are delivering online and are you making sure that things are accessible. So to make sure that you avoid those types of problems, that's what we talk to a lot of clients about and people in general. How can you make that transition smooth? How can you make sure you're addressing those needs of the online learner and the online environment to incorporate UDL, universal design for learning, and best practices?
It's such a great point because I've experienced this just in the last month as I'm getting courses ready for the next semester and seeing those differences that exist between an online version of a course and an in-person version of a course. And sometimes I'm teaching both at the same time, and how important it is to create the learning experience that is a fit for that modality.
Mm-hmm.
So while certainly thinking about the aspects of UDL and accessibility, but also thinking about the learner experience.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes a good discussion in class doesn't necessarily translate online. What makes a good assignment online sometimes is better as a discussion when you're in person. And thinking about what the deliverables need to be for students so that they're demonstrating that they're meeting the learning objectives.
Mm-hmm.
And also thinking about instructions, right? When we give instructions in person and face-to-face, how different that is than when we're providing instructions online. I was given a course shell recently where the instructions for common assignments were all created for an in-person learning environment. And I'm teaching an online version of the course. So I needed to go in and literally change the deliverables that students are going to hand in because they need something different in the online version. And I think this often gets overlooked until the last minute.
Right. And sometimes until you're teaching it and all of a sudden you realize that this doesn't work when you're flooded with questions. What do I need to do? How do I do this? Where do I find it? The online version needs more options for supports and how you can build that then in the structure and how you communicate and even the flow of the template and the navigation for even just to find those simple things that student needs for success. When students get frustrated, there's inconsistencies, they drop. They're going to withdraw, and hopefully they're not withdrawing completely from your program and going somewhere else. But it was covered in other areas of the report too, the involvement of the faculty, the engagement of the faculty, how the faculty interact and create that community of learners. While that seems to a side of what these are for those strategies, they really should be incorporated in that overall strategy for online. When you're building those, how do you expect your faculty to interact? How are you going to create that community? And how are you going to make that regular and substantial interaction? How are you going to create that without necessarily always having to have live sessions? Because there are other ways to do that as well.
Talk about some of the ways that you coach our clients to do that and that you do that in your own classes. I know you are a big fan of class discussions. So talk about some ways that we can operationalize those interactions in the online environment.
Yeah, it all starts with building that community. How are you going to connect with them? How are you going to create participation? How are you going to create excitement? Obviously, discussion is one way to do that. And like you said, that's a big soapbox thing for me. Discussion should not be an assignment. Discussion doesn't need to be, you're not creating interaction by asking someone to submit a 500-word paper and someone else responding into it and saying, great job, Susie, on your paper. This is not substantial. How can you create that excitement, especially when you're building in students want workforce skills? Build those workforce skills, build those into the discussions. If they're adult learners, how can they take what they've learned in the field and apply it there? This is where the faculty can engage. This is where they take their expertise. Faculty sometimes talk about and they complain, well, when I go to online and you're giving me a provided shell, or even just something that they've started and they haven't built in all those other things, they want autonomy. They wait, don't tell me how to try to teach. We're not. Nobody is. You don't have to do that. Just because you have structure, just because you have navigation, just because you have the supports in there, we work with them all the time to be able to say, okay, what is your vision for the course? How do you need to have these achieved? Here are your outcomes. How are you showing mastery of those? And especially in a case where online isn't always, if an on-ground is 16 weeks, an online course isn't always 16 weeks. It could be 8, it could be 5, it could be 6. It really varies. Just compressing that into, a 16 into that does not mean that you are providing great supports to it, because you've covered all the same things that were in that 16-week course. 16 weeks allows you to usually expand beyond the confines of those outcomes to provide exceptional additional learning opportunities. Other ways you begin to focus. So if you're able to take that, you can do live sessions where you're doing that. You can have students submit video interaction. You can create that virtual field trip that students are doing. So it's all that. It's getting the faculty excited about interacting with the students in a different way than they're used to. And once you overcome that, once you start out from day one, working with them and getting them excited, find out what makes them tick, finding out what makes them excited, just letting them know you're approachable, instantly will change that option. So that's what I try to do myself when I teach. But beyond that, we try to encourage in the design process, how can you make it personal? How can you make that connection with students? How can you make sure that the content is relevant and provides mastery at the same time?
Excellent. And I think that I hear that from so many of the professors that we work with and that we have interviewed on this podcast. When they're sharing their best practices, it's all about how they weave their personality and their knowledge from the field into the classroom. So students
and that's what students want.
Yeah.
They want the engagement. They want that connection with you. And it's not hard to do that. You just have to be present and accessible. Those two things.
Yes.
Accessible to them mostly.
And in the classroom.
Yes.
That's another thing that I'm always startled and surprised when I hear that instructors aren't in their classroom as often, but getting in that discussion board, making video announcements, if you have the option to create some introductions, so for the week or the module. So using the opportunities that you have for students to see you and hear you, providing video and audio feedback. Yeah.
It's most LMSs now have that ability for you to easily make those types of very small, simple things, whether it's in feedback, whether it's, like you said, the announcements, you can put it in discussions, you can just make different videos with them. It's how you're making to connect. But the important thing, we're just in the initial stages of how the measurement is going to need to be gauged with this regular and substantial interaction. How is that assessed? That's what some of the schools are trying to figure out, how do I do that? How am I measuring it? So giving them the structures and the reports and the alignments to show that. So when someone, as a course, you might show as an exemplar to the rest of your faculty, here's a one that have been redone. This is how it looks. This is why. This is what the benefit is to you. And to see that doing that can make their life easier, I think then is the light bulb moment for them. Say, oh, this is better. This is improved.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit more about this idea of faculty engagement and faculty training. Last year's Chloe report honed in on that idea that instructors need more training. They want to participate online, but they don't know how. And they want to get more comfortable with it, but they don't know how. Talk about how the Babb Group works with faculty and faculty trainings to support schools with this effort to get instructors ready.
That whole part of the report I thought was very exciting, because we see that where faculty is having more buy-in. Faculty's more excited. They understand that now, the ones that fought it, okay, now it's here to stay. How I need to learn, I need to master it. How do I do this? And as schools probably communicate we need to retain, we need to build, it's the business adage of it's always easier to keep an existing customer than to try to get a new one. Well, the same thing. It's easier to keep an existing student than to try to find another one. So how do you do that? Well, that falls on the onus of the faculty, again, for the most part, because they're the first line contact with those students. So how are they going to do that? So the biggest thing is to get them to understand that online is their friend, that having the right tools in there, having a consistent navigation does not impede their flexibility or their freedom as an instructor to have content in there. Even if you're having a design course provided to you that is mostly done, that still gives you the freedom to, and we do this a lot when we're in the trainings and we work with clients, how do we get faculty, even though Sam designed the course, Betty and Jackie might be the ones and Ed might be the ones teaching it. How are they going to put their spin on it to make it personal to them? Putting in those resources, helping the faculty understand that, say, okay, in the online environment, these are the best practices that work with students. These are what students need to be successful, but how can you make it personal to yourself? So what are the workplace skills that you can provide in there? How are you going to train them to understand what engagement is? Engagement isn't just maybe posting an announcement, or engagement isn't just providing, feedback, hopefully weekly. Some think it's a much, making that regular interaction with them. How do you create that community of learners? How do you participate? What is an open-ended and engaging discussion question? How to provide good feedback, because sometimes you might be, if in class, you're scribbling it on there and handing it back. What is something that provides relevance? Even with the micro-credentials and the workforce development type things there, those types of students, adult learners looking for those workplace skills, how are you as a faculty? Sometimes you can get into a rabbit hole of theory and knowledge base. The student also wants that application to the workforce. So how are you blending those types of things? How are you able to take your skills? How are you partnering with employers that you may know personally or within your community to try to bring that into the course to make it live and make it relevant? But it's mostly involved of taking them to say, you're a great instructor, you're a great faculty member. Now let's help you learn those skills to be successful online, because it's a completely different animal. Anyone who's gone from teaching, you yourself, you know that you clearly know the difference, because you juggle both all the time. To say, what that student needs is going to be different. So to build those skills, to build that confidence, sometimes it's just training on technology. That can be, it's ever changing. How are you using AI? How can you use that to make yourself a more effective and time management tool for teaching and learning? How can it help you create tools for students who might be struggling and maybe need some extra supports? It's endless.
Yeah. And these are such great examples. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about how, back when you and I first started instructional design and starting in online learning, there was a real, I would say, formality to what we would create and put online. In terms of an online class, and really strict writing conventions. And I remember thinking of it as almost writing a book instead of being conversational. And I was in a faculty meeting last week where the general vibe was, we want to be conversational in our online classrooms. And we want to be conversational even with giving instructions, even in that instruction section.
Be authentic. Yes.
The guiding principle was, in your online classroom, talk to your students the same way you would talk to them in your classroom, down to how you provide instructions. We want instructions to be clear, of course. We want the deliverables and the due dates to be clear. However, in that first paragraph that you have in your instruction section, or those first bullet points, that it can be conversational. It's an opportunity to show your personality. It's an opportunity to show your connection with that group of students. To say, hey, I know that you were all at this game last weekend, or everyone saw this, or, to really acknowledge the now.
Yes,
and the present moment of the students in front of you, the same way you would if you were having a conversation with in-person students. And I thought, what a shift that's been over the last few years to be more conversational in our classrooms and to be more real and more authentic.
Yeah. And something else that I failed to mention before when we're talking about working with faculty is the important need to address the accessibility and inclusivity standards. That is where, even when you have a pre-designed course, you can provide faculty one that passes all the accessibility standards. But when the faculty are teaching, are they being accessible? Are they adding any videos they have? Do they have captioning or transcripts? In anything they do different, are they designing content, if they're doing it themselves, that is inclusive to learners for different types of learning styles, different learning needs? And you might think it's great. I'm going to do this and I'm going to have all my assignments are going to be listed in RenFOT. So it jumps out to students so they know what they are. 20 years ago, we did that and that was fine. Then now we realize and we know better that that's an accessibility problem. So, looking at those accessibility concerns, especially as you're trying to take something from on ground to online, that is a perfect opportunity to make sure that the content that you're designing and the courses that you're providing to students meet those accessibility and inclusivity standards.
Great example. And I want to switch gears now and talk a little bit more about expanding non-degree programs. This was one of the last things that we wanted to highlight about the Chloe 9 report. And that we know, we see it in the school leaders that we talk to right here on this podcast. The ones that are being successful are the ones that are reaching out to either learners that have already gone through one of their programs or community learners for these micro-credential programs, certificate programs, again, non-degree programs. If you could talk about the importance of these kinds of programs and how we can work to develop them and how it doesn't have to be starting from scratch.
No, it doesn't. And a lot of times it could be one, this really addresses the need that we see there. Workforce, skills, professional development, those are just prime for these types of micro-credential courses. And the value in them and why, to your point that you said that you don't have to start from scratch, say it's a business skills course that might teach Excel, Word, all those types of things. You could pull pieces of all of those out and make individual micro-credential course. Someone can learn skills in, how to use project, how to use Excel for your business skills. These individuals in a very simple way would be ways that you could create those types of individual certificate courses. There's a big boom for this one because they can get the credentials and get the benefits without having to go through an entire degree program. And I know that some people might look at it as like, well, that's not what we want. We want people in a degree program. If you've gotten someone's foot in the door and excited about learning through those micro-credential courses or those workplace learning courses through your continuing education, they might enroll later and develop, now I need this. Oh, I'm excited about this. This is great. This has really helped me. Now I can take this full degree and do these. And because they see the benefit of the learning. So I see it as a good way to get a foot in the door with those types of things. But it's exciting that schools are listening. They're listening to what the ones, and to your point, the ones who have fully listened already are already expanding this. We see some that have directors of micro-credential programs within their institutions that their sole role is the development of these programs. So it's an exciting path forward. And I think that we would see a lot more growth. And I see a lot more conversations with clients and people that we talk to about, we're looking to develop this. They may not know how to get started and then how to make it happen. But the conversations are starting. So that's exciting.
I think it's exciting too. And something that I've been hearing from, again, guests on the podcast that are doing this really well they are listening to their learners and they're also listening to corporate partners.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Really looking for, instead of we need to, make something up and doing all the market research, well, you need to do some of that. Looking at what do our local employers need? What skills gaps do they have? Or we are already in a partnership with this organization. What skills gaps do they have? What do they need their employees to be learning? And then we can take existing content and customize that program to meet their needs and teach directly to their employees and building out programs that don't necessarily take place at the institution, but even out in the community, or providing, an LMS specifically for their employees.
Yeah.
And seeing that growth of, that community outreach aspect of micro-credential programs. It's not always we have to attract students, but we're going to attract employers and we're going to partner with them and meet their specific needs. And we're going to grow together. And that's just good for the institution. It's good for learners. It's good for the employer. And it's good for communities in that way. So it's just
Absolutely.
a win all the way around.
Absolutely.
All right, Sheila, is there anything else that stands out for you that you want to share about this year's Chloe report?
Just this overall excitement that there continues to be continued emphasis with online learning, more embracing, more schools saying that they're going to increase the spending on it, which anytime you do that, nobody likes, obviously, to spend money on anything.